The smell reached him before thought did. Cedar oil, dense and slightly sweet in the way of things that have absorbed decades without complaint. And beneath it, pressed wool, the particular damp wool smell of cloth that has been folded and refolded until folding is what it knows. And then, underneath both, the one that did not belong to fabric at all, the cold, coppery bite of oxidized iron rising from the trunk lock in the corner of the room, slowly without apology, making itself known whether or not anyone had asked. Elias Vance was 33 years old. He had $4.16 in the account tied to his name. The room was cool in the way of rooms with no radiator. A damp, temperate cool specific to overcast, October afternoons in Millbrook Falls, Pennsylvania, where the textile mills had shut down, one by one, across the previous 12 years, and left behind buildings full of a cold they'd never been designed to hold. The iron shears on the cutting table were smoother than skin and colder than the air. And when Elias picked them up, not to use them, simply because his hands needed something, the metal pulled warmth from his fingers immediately, the way tools do when they are waiting for work that is not coming. He pressed the pedal of the sewing machine once. It clicked, dry, mechanical, hollow. The belt had seized 3 weeks ago. The single click it gave him now was not the sound of a machine, but the sound of the habit of one, the muscle memory of a foot that had pressed that pedal 6,000 times and did not know how to stop. Then, from 2 floors up, the heavy wooden slam of a notice being pinned to a door. Not his door. The old pressing room, where the Marchetti family had operated alterations since 1987. He knew that sound the way a man knows weather, not by studying it, but by having lived inside it long enough that his body read it before his mind caught up. Consolidated Carrick Properties had been pinning notices in this building for 11 weeks, working down from the top floor, with the methodical efficiency of a company that had already decided what the building was going to become, and was simply completing the paperwork. Elias adjusted his canvas apron and looked down at the cutting table. Threadbare spools, paper patterns weighted by smooth river stones, the needle case with its pocked leather cover, and the tarnished iron key left to him by his uncle. Alongside this room, the rusted trunk in the corner, and nothing else of apparent value. The key was heavy for its size. His uncle, Gerald Vance, had died in August owing $9,341.12 to Consolidated Carrick Properties in back lease payments. His hands bore 31 needle scars, most clustered at the base of the right index finger. The record of wool pushed through at speed. They were not remarkable. They were simply the record of the work, indifferent to whether anyone was paying attention. He set the shears down and looked at the trunk. He had been looking at it, in the particular way of not quite looking, for 4 days, since the letter from an attorney's office in Allentown, 61 miles northeast, had arrived to tell him that his uncle's estate included one item not listed in the debt assessment. One item Consolidated Carrick had either overlooked or not bothered to claim: a rusted sewing trunk. Outside, through the single high window, a dry leaf fell past the glass without hurry. The October air moved through the gap at the window's corner, with the soft, damp persistence of a season that has nowhere to be. What, he thought, looking at the trunk, could a dead man have wanted him to find? The offices of Hartwell, Curran and Associates occupied the entire 4th floor of a building on Hamilton Street in Allentown, whose lobby had a marble floor and a security guard who looked at Elias's canvas work, coat the way a customs officer looks at a bag without a lock. Elias had taken the 7:41 commuter train. He had eaten nothing that morning. The conference room held 4 people. Marcus Hargrove sat at the head of the table the way a man sits when a table has been his long enough that the wood has learned the shape of his elbows. He was 61 years old, wore a watch with a platinum case, and a cashmere blazer in a shade of charcoal, so precise it suggested a tailor Elias would have respected under different circumstances. He was the principal stakeholder of Consolidated Carrick Properties, and the grandson of the man who had originally acquired the Spool Street building. His attorney, Dressler, sat to his left with a legal pad already half full of notes in a handwriting. Elias could not read from across the table. The estate was read as follows: Gerald Elias Vance, deceased, had died with liabilities totaling $9,341.12 and assets totaling nothing actionable. The building's lease was voided by default. The contents of the unit had been assessed as of negligible commercial value. To his nephew, Elias Daniel Vance, was left one item not subject to the debt offset. One rusted iron trunk, manufacturer unknown, approximate age indeterminate, contents unverified. Hargrove looked at the trunk on the conference room's side table, then at Elias, and the look he gave was not cruel in any theatrical way. It was quieter and more precise than cruelty. The look of a man who has already closed a door in his mind and is waiting for the person on the other side to accept the fact of the door. "Your uncle," he said pleasantly, "was a sentimental man. He said it the way you say something pleasant to someone whose feelings you have already decided do not require consideration." Dressler wrote something on his legal pad. In that same room, Hargrove had received documentation for a property development project, estimated at $3,480,000. Received it with the particular calm of someone collecting something already decided. Elias lifted the trunk. 47 pounds, the same as when he had carried it upstairs for his uncle 3 years ago, when his uncle's knees had made the stairs too difficult. The iron lock pressed cold against the front of his coat, the cedar smell rising, the faint copper of rust at his collar. No one stood to open the door for him. Out on Hamilton Street, the October air met him flat and cool, tasting of exhaust and the first threat of rain. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then he noticed again what he had noticed and not yet mentioned to anyone, that the trunk, though corroded at every other point, had a lock that had been oiled within the last 18 months. Someone had recently opened it, and someone had recently closed it again. The address in the estate paperwork, the property from which Gerald Vance had originally received the trunk as part of his own inheritance 34 years prior, was in the town of Crestgate, Pennsylvania, 43 miles south-southwest of Millbrook Falls, where the hills flatten and old mill roads run through stands of chestnut oak not logged since the 1940s. Elias drove there in a borrowed 2009 Civic, with a passenger window that did not seal completely, so that October air moved through the gap at highway speed with a soft, constant hiss. He had $11.40. He had spent $3.76 on gas. The hunger was present but manageable, the kind that clarifies rather than distracts, that makes the edges of things slightly sharper. The property on Township Route 612 was not what the name suggested. There had been a house. Its structure still stood in the technical sense, still organized around something that had once been a roof. But the east wall had collapsed inward sometime in the last decade. The porch had separated from the main frame and listed toward the yard, and the paint, originally white, had pulled away in long vertical strips, leaving mostly weathered gray wood. The yard was thick with wild aster gone to seed and goldenrod, standing stiff and dry in the cool afternoon air. The smell was vegetable and old, rotted wood, wet leaves packed against the foundation, and something sweeter underneath. The dried seed casings of the aster, which smell faintly of anise when autumn air moves through them. The temperature had dropped several degrees in the valley. The air sat against his skin with a mild, pressing weight. A crow called once from the tree line and did not call again. He almost got back in the car. Not out of fear, something more honest, closer to standing at the edge of a task that will require more than you currently have. But the smell that met him at the threshold of the interior was the smell of the trunk, cedar and oxidized iron, and its presence in a place he had never entered was not coincidence. It was connection, and connection, for a man who worked with pattern, and the exact relationship between elements, was evidence. He found the anomaly in the workroom, where the light came through two north-facing windows and fell across a floor of wide plank pine. The floor near the east wall was unlevel in the specific way of a surface that has been replaced rather than simply warped. The planks at the perimeter did not match the planks at the center in age or grain pattern, and two of them, near the baseboard, had been fastened with cut nails that were not original to the structure, driven flush rather than recessed, placed by someone working quickly or carefully or both. Elias crouched and pressed his palm flat against the center of the replaced section. Hollow. He worked for 2 hours and 14 minutes. He had found, in the collapsed east room, a short iron pry bar that had been there long enough to acquire its own patina, and he used it carefully, the way a man uses a tool, when he does not know what he will find, and does not want to damage it. The cut nails came up with resistance, each one requiring patient pressure rather than force. And the silence of the house during that work was the specific silence of a space holding its breath. The replaced planks came free in order. Beneath them was a cavity framed in cedar, a box without a lid, approximately 31 inches by 19 inches by 11 inches, set into the subfloor with a precision that had required either a very good carpenter or a very determined one. The smell that came up from it was the smell of the trunk, concentrated and sealed, cedar and something thin and papery and old in the way of objects protected from air and light for a very long time. His fingers found fabric first, silk, cold and smooth and weightless, in the particular way of weighted silk common in tailoring from the turn of the last century. Beneath it was a flat wooden case with a brass clasp that opened without resistance. Inside the case were 4 hand-bound pattern books, their spines faded to the amber of old linen, their pages filled with hand-drawn pattern drafts in ink that had browned but not faded, annotated in a handwriting that was dense and precise, and consistent across all 4 volumes. He turned to the frontispiece of the first volume, proprietary of the Millbrook Falls Master Tailors Guild, established by charter of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Registered the 14th of March, 1891. Affirmed under seal of the Department of Public Records, Borough of Millbrook Falls, being the original and permanent record of the Guild's land, patterns, tools, and structures held in perpetuity for the use of its members and their lawful successors. He sat back on his heels and was still for a moment. Beneath the pattern books was an envelope, cream-colored and sealed with red wax pressed with a ring. A needle crossed over a measuring rule. The envelope bore a single line of address in the same handwriting, to the tailor who knows what this means. He broke the seal. The letter inside was dated the 22nd of September, 1923. It had been written by a woman named Constance Aldred Vance, Gerald Vance's grandmother, the last registered member of the Millbrook Falls Master Tailors Guild, and the lawful holder of its charter. That charter, she wrote, granted to the Guild's members and their successors a permanent and irrevocable right of occupancy over the building on Spool Street. The building that Consolidated Carrick Properties now claimed to own. A developer in 1923 had attempted to acquire it through pressure and attrition, waiting for the records to disappear. She had hidden the charter and the deed notation in this house, which belonged to her sister, and appeared in no public record associated with the Guild. She had trusted that one day, when the building was threatened again, as it would be, she wrote, as buildings like this always are, a tailor would find it. I have worked all my life, she wrote in the letter's final paragraph, with the assumption that careful people leave careful records, and that careful records, in the end, outlast careless men. I do not know your name. I know your hands. You are reading this because you still believe that what is made with precision is worth keeping. So do I. Keep it. Elias folded the letter along its original creases. Through the workroom's north window, he heard a car pull onto the gravel drive. One door opened, then another. He did not move immediately. He looked at the documents in the cavity, at the silk, at the 4 pattern books. at the charter in its cedar preservation, and he thought, not generally, but precisely, in the order in which each thing would need to happen. Then he stood, slid the pattern books inside his coat, folded the letter into his breast pocket, picked up the pry bar, and turned toward the door. The man who came through the workroom door first was Caffrey, one of Dressler's associates. Younger, wearing a wool topcoat the color of a storm system, carrying a briefcase he set on the floor with the efficient confidence of someone who expects to be in a room, only as long as it takes to deliver news. Marcus Hargrove came in behind him. He looked around the workroom with the assessing look of a man for whom properties are calculations, and when his eyes moved from the open cavity in the floor to Elias, the assessment did not change. He had come prepared for this. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice the same as it had been in the conference room, pleasant, addressed to someone whose feelings had already been set aside. This property was identified in the municipal assessment as a condemned structure under Zoning Classification Ordinance 7-114, subsection B. You are currently in violation. Any materials removed are subject to seizure as property of the redevelopment estate. Caffrey placed a document on the windowsill without looking at Elias. You have 72 hours to vacate all claimed items and cease access to this property and the Spool Street building. After that, we file for summary judgment. The debt owed by your uncle's estate transfers to you personally. He looked at the pattern books inside Elias's coat. His expression was the same as when he had called Gerald Vance a sentimental man. Pleasant, closed, the expression of a man who has decided what the other person is and sees nothing in the room requiring revision. Elias looked at the condemnation order on the windowsill. He did not pick it up. He read it where it lay because his eyes were good, and official documents were a kind of pattern he had learned to read years ago, during the blacklisting, when understanding institutional language had become a practical necessity. He read the ordinance number. He read the subsection. He read the classification date. He looked up. "I'll need a copy of the original filing," he said quietly. Caffrey looked at Hargrove. Hargrove nodded once. The nod of a man asked a small and irritating question by someone he expected to be silent, and Caffrey left a copy on the windowsill, and they walked back through the house, and Elias heard their car on the gravel, and then the road, and then only the crow once from the tree line. He looked at the condemnation order again. Zoning Classification Ordinance 7-114, subsection B, carried a classification date of November 3rd, 1956. It applied to structures incorporated under the municipal charter of Crestgate Borough. The Crestgate Borough Municipal Charter had been ratified in 1927. Constance Aldred Vance's sister had built this house in 1914. He spent the following 4 days doing 3 things. He hired, for a flat fee of $422, borrowed against the formal written valuation of the pattern books, which a Philadelphia antiquarian assessed within 48 hours, at a figure that made the lending straightforward. A property attorney named Renata Okoro, whose office was on the 2nd floor of a building in Reading that smelled of carpet cleaner and old coffee, and whose walls held 17 years of framed case outcomes in a handwriting almost as precise as Constance Vance's. He filed with the Pennsylvania State Archives for a certified copy of the 1891 Guild Charter and its land registration. The archivist, a man named Brower, who had clearly not been asked for this document in several decades, called back within 23 hours to confirm the charter was on file and had never been legally dissolved, amended, or transferred, and he read the full legal history of Consolidated Carrick Properties' acquisition of the Spool Street building. A history Hargrove had apparently never felt necessary to verify at its foundation, because the foundation was 63 years old and in the possession of a tailor, and therefore beneath verifications. The hearing took place in a county courthouse in Allentown on a Tuesday morning in late October. Marcus Hargrove sat with Dressler and 2 additional attorneys at a table holding 4 water glasses and a filing stack 4 inches thick. He was wearing the cashmere blazer and the platinum-cased watch and the gold cufflinks, and he looked at Elias across the courtroom with the expression of a man who has brought overwhelming resources to a conflict with someone who has none and finds the situation tedious precisely because the outcome is not in question. Renata Okoro placed 3 documents before the hearing officer. The first, the certified copy of the 1891 Guild Charter, which contained on its 3rd page a land registration clause granting permanent and irrevocable occupancy rights over the Spool Street building to the Guild and its lawful successors. Rights that could not be extinguished by sale, debt transfer, or municipal ordinance unless the charter had been legally dissolved, which it had not. The second, the pre-incorporation deed record for the Crestgate property, establishing its construction date as 1914. 13 years before the municipal charter, under which the condemnation order had been issued. The third, the condemnation order itself, with zoning classification ordinance 7-114, subsection B, highlighted in yellow, alongside the statute's own enabling clause, which read that the ordinance applied exclusively to structures incorporated within Crestgate Borough's municipal boundaries at the time of the borough's charter ratification in 1927 or thereafter. Hargrove's lead attorney asked for a brief recess. It was not granted. The hearing officer reviewed the documents for 11 minutes. When he looked up, he looked at Hargrove's table first, at the 4 water glasses, the 4 attorneys, the 4-inch stack of filings, and then he spoke. The condemnation order is hereby voided as applied to both subject properties. The 1891 charter constitutes a prior and superior claim to the Spool Street property. Consolidated Carrick Properties acquisition is found to have proceeded on an invalid title chain. The title reverts. Hargrove was still in the way of a man who has discovered that the floor he was standing on is not where he believed it to be, not yet panicking, simply recalibrating, discovering that he does not, in fact, know how. Elias looked at him across the courtroom. "My uncle," he said quietly, "was a careful man." He said it without heat. "The way you say something true that does not require emphasis. The way a man speaks, when the words themselves are sufficient and all the years that went into earning the right to say them are already present in the saying." He picked up his coat and walked out into the October afternoon. The legal proceedings took 4 months and 17 days. Consolidated Carrick Properties filed 2 appeals. Both were denied. The title chain irregularity, once investigated, extended across 7 properties the company had acquired through the same process. Pressure through debt, reliance on records no one would trace, movement before anyone could move against them. The Pennsylvania Attorney General's office opened an inquiry in January. By April, the company had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, with liabilities totaling $3,912,000 against assets the trustee valued at substantially less. Dressler was disbarred in March for his role in certifying the title chains. Marcus Hargrove was indicted on 4 counts of fraudulent conveyance and 1 count of filing false municipal documents. His platinum watch, his cashmere blazer, and the contents of the Hamilton Street conference room were itemized in the asset seizure, filing with the precision that financial documents always from someone, once they have been taken from someone. Elias Vance reopened the Spool Street building on the 15th of May. He named it the Vance Aldred Workroom. Vance for his uncle and himself, Aldred for Constance, who had understood 101 years Boss Day morning in October that the right document in the right cavity, under the right floorboards, would outlast any man who believed that attention to detail was the province of people without power. The workroom held 12 apprentice stations and a reference library of pattern drafts going back to 1891. The Marchetti family returned as the building's first tenant. Elias stood at his cutting table on a morning in late May that smelled of cedar and linseed seed oil and the clean cold of good cloth, and he looked at his hands, the 31 needle scars, the specific record of the work, and picked up the iron shears. They were warm from the morning light. He made the first cut of what would become, in 2 years, a line of tailored work that the Philadelphia Inquirer described as clothing that takes the idea of patience seriously. He did not correct the description. He had never thought of patience as an idea. He had always thought of it as a practice, the specific, daily, unglamorous discipline of a man who knows that the most precise measurements are taken when there is no reason to hurry, and no one watching, and the only audience is the cloth itself, which does not care about your urgency, but will record your accuracy forever. Overlooked people do not disappear. They wait in the accuracy of their own records, in the cedar and iron smell of things that were hidden for good reason, for the moment when history finally asks the right question, it bloodshed of the right person, and the right person answers, not loudly, precisely.